She smiled at Amara the way a person smiles before they say something they've been waiting to say for a very long time. Not warm, not welcoming, calculated. Minhee Seo set her teacup down on the marble table slowly, deliberately, and looked at her son's wife the way you look at something that doesn't belong in your house. Then, in front of two relatives who said nothing, and a housekeeper who suddenly found the floor very interesting, she said it. My son has many strengths. Choosing wisely has never been one of them. Amara didn't move, didn't flinch, but something behind her eyes shifted, the way a door quietly closes when it realizes no one is coming through. If that had happened to you 6 weeks into a marriage, inside a house you were supposed to call home, what would you have done? If this story already has your attention, you're exactly the kind of person we made it for. Subscribe and stay until the end, because what Kieran Seo does, when he finally finds out what happened inside that dining room, will leave you speechless. Hit like, leave a comment with your city or country. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And now let's go back to where it all really began. Amara Bennett had made exactly one mistake in her 34 years of life, and it wasn't the kind of mistake most people would call a mistake at all. She had fallen in love with Kieran Seo, not the version of Kieran that other people knew, the one with the reputation that made grown men change their plans, and city officials return phone calls on the same day. She had fallen in love with the version most people never got close enough to see. The one who kept a worn paperback in his jacket pocket and read it in the car when he thought no one was watching. The one who remembered her coffee order after the second time they met and never once made a production of it. The one who, on the night, she cried about a project that had been taken from her at work. A design she had spent 8 months building sat beside her on the floor with his back against the couch and said nothing at all. Because he understood that sometimes nothing was exactly the right thing to say. She had not gone looking for him. That part needed to be said clearly, because people had a way of writing the story of Amara and Kieran that started in the wrong place, as though she had chosen him for his name, his money, his power. As though a woman like her couldn't have reasons that had nothing to do with what he could offer. She had met him at a fundraiser for a youth architecture program in Newark. She was there because she had helped design the curriculum. He was there because one of his associates had built the community center where it was held, and Kieran had a rule about showing up when his name was attached to something. They had ended up beside the same table of cold appetizers, both of them avoiding the same group of loud men near the bar. He had looked at the shrimp cocktail the way she was already looking at it, with profound personal disappointment, and she had laughed before she could stop herself. That was it. That was where it started. Not with power. Not with fear. With shrimp cocktail and the specific kind of laughter that comes out of you when you've let your guard down before you realized it. They dated for 11 months before he asked her to marry him. She said yes 3 days after he asked. Because the first 2 days she spent convincing herself she was making a rational decision when the truth was the decision had already been made the moment he looked at her across that table and she felt something settle inside her chest that had been restless her entire life. She knew what he was. She hadn't built a life in Newark without understanding how certain things operated. She knew the name Seo carried weight that wasn't attached to legitimate business, knew that the men who nodded at Kieran when he walked into rooms were not nodding because they respected his architectural taste. She knew all of it, and she chose him anyway, because she was 34 years old and she understood. The way you only understand after you've been disappointed enough times, that a person isn't just the worst thing about them. Kieran was more than his worst thing. She believed that. She kept believing it, even on the nights he didn't come home until 3 in the morning smelling like citrus smoke, and decisions she wasn't allowed to ask about. She believed it during the silences that appeared in their marriage, like hairline fractures small, easy to ignore, but there. She believed it because the alternative was too heavy to carry, and because, when Kieran was present, truly present, he was the kind of man who made you feel like the world had edges you could trust. What she hadn't fully accounted for was his family. This SEO family home sat on a private road in Alpine, New Jersey, a house that announced itself before you saw it, the way powerful things always did. Kieran had grown up there. It was where his father had conducted business and his mother had learned to conduct herself. And somewhere in that house was a woman who had raised a man capable of great loyalty and great violence, and had somehow concluded that those qualities should have been directed toward a different kind of wife entirely. Amara had met Minhee Seo 4 times before the wedding. Each meeting had been correct, polite, the kind of conversation that leaves no marks and no warmth. Minhee was a woman who had learned very early in life that control was most effective when it was invisible, and she exercised it the way a surgeon uses a scalpel, without the other person feeling a thing until much later. Amara had thought, she's reserved, she's adjusting. She'll come around. She had been wrong about all 3. 6 weeks after the wedding, Kieran went to Chicago for what he described as a business matter that required his physical presence. He would be gone 4 days. He kissed her at the door at 5 in the morning and said, "Don't let them get in your head," which was the most direct warning he had ever given her, and also the most useless one, because he said it, and then he left, and she was the one who had to stay. Minhee called her the same afternoon, not to check on her, to invite her to the house that Sunday for a family dinner. The way she said it, "I thought it would be a good opportunity for you to spend time with everyone," had the texture of something genuine. Amara had held the phone and thought, maybe this is the beginning. Maybe she's trying. She drove herself there on Sunday. She wore a dark green dress that Kieran had once said looked good on her. She brought wine she had specifically researched to make sure it was the right label, the right year. She had stood outside the front door for a moment before ringing the bell. Not from fear, she told herself, but from something she didn't have a word for yet. The housekeeper let her in, led her to a sitting room where Minhee and Sora were already seated, and where 2 of Kieran's aunts were arranged on adjacent chairs, the way people arrange themselves when they've already had a conversation they don't want the newcomer to know about. Minhee greeted her with a smile. Sorsa greeted her with her eyes. That's the only way to describe it. Soraseo looked at Amara the way you look at a problem you've already solved in your head, but are being forced to address out loud anyway. She was 26, 9 years younger than Amara, with her brother's bone structure and none of his restraint. She had grown up understanding that the CO name was armor and access, and she had worn both without apology her entire life. Nice. And somehow made it sound like the opposite. Amara sat down. She accepted the tea that was offered. She answered questions about her work. She was an architect at a firm in Manhattan, one of 2 black women in senior positions, a fact she was proud of and careful with in certain rooms. The aunts nodded at the appropriate moments. Minhee asked about her parents, with the tone of someone completing a checklist. It was only later, when the aunt stepped out to the garden and the housekeeper disappeared toward the kitchen, that Sora set down her cup and looked at Amara with the particular expression of someone who has been waiting for precisely this moment. "Can I ask you something? And I mean this genuinely." Amara waited. "What did you think was going to happen? When you married him?" Question landed differently than it appeared. It was not curiosity. It was the setup for something. Amara kept her voice even. "I thought I was marrying the man I love." "Right." Sora nodded slowly, as though she were processing something complicated. "But you had to know this family has a certain position, a certain history. I know the family well enough." "Do you?" Sora tilted her head. "Because the women in this family have always been from families with standing, with history. My father's mother was from a family that had been respected in Seoul for 4 generations. My mother's people, Sora." Minhee's voice came from the doorway, even and controlled. Sora stopped, but she didn't look sorry. Minhee came back into the room and sat down with the deliberateness of someone who had decided it was time to say the thing herself rather than let her daughter say it poorly. She looked at Amara for a moment, not unkindly, which made it worse. "My son loves you," she said. "I believe that is true. Kieran has always been capable of great attachment." She paused. "But love does not answer every question. And there are questions, practical ones, about legacy, about the way this family is perceived, that he has not fully considered." "What kind of questions?" Amara asked, and her voice was steady, which cost her something. The kind that will follow you, Minhee said simply. Both of you. The kind that will follow any children you have, if you have them. This world, our world, has expectations that are not fair, but they are real. And a woman who sits at Kieran's side will be measured. She will be evaluated, and I would be doing you no kindness by pretending that certain people in our circle will not draw their own conclusions. She was careful not to say the thing directly. She didn't have to. Amara understood exactly what Minhee was telling her. She had understood it in the first 20 seconds. She sat with it in her body, that specific exhaustion that comes when you've had to be strong in a room where you should have been safe, and she said nothing, because if she opened her mouth to say the things that was true, which was that she had spent her entire professional life being measured and evaluated and concluded about, and that she was done letting other people's conclusions define the space she was allowed to occupy. If she said all of that, it would become a scene. And a scene would get back to Kieran. And Kieran would have to choose. She wasn't ready for him to have to choose. Not yet. So she said, I appreciate your honesty, which was not a lie and was not the truth either. And she finished her tea, and she waited for the afternoon to end. It didn't end. It extended in the way only painful things extend, into dinner. More relatives arrived. A cousin she hadn't met before who looked at her the way you look at a word you can't pronounce. An uncle who asked about her architecture firm in a tone that suggested he expected it to be small. The table filled up around her, and Amara sat inside it like a woman, sitting inside a room she had not been invited into, which was exactly how it had been designed to feel. She ate. She answered questions. She laughed at the right moments. Not because anything was funny, but because laughter was armor too, and she had learned early how to wear it. Minhee watched her through dinner with the expression of a woman waiting to see if a experiment would hold. Sora beside her had stopped being careful. Kieran tells us you did the renovation on that building in Soho, one of the aunts said at some point, and it was a genuine comment in open door, and Amara had started to walk through it. Had started to describe the project with the kind of quiet confidence that was real and earned when Sora said, it must be nice to have access to those kinds of clients now that you're a CEO. The table went quiet. Not the whole table. The conversation continued in a low hum at the other end, but the part of the table where Amara was sitting went very quiet. The way things go quiet when everyone present has heard something they're pretending they didn't hear. Amara looked at Sora. Sora met her eyes without blinking. I had those clients before I married your brother, Amara said. Her voice was flat and clear. Of course, Sora said. And smiled. It was the smile that did it. Not an escalation, just a confirmation. You have no power here, and we both know it. Amara looked down at her plate. She thought about Kieran. About the way he had said, don't let them get in your head at 5 in the morning at the door, like a warning she was supposed to have been better equipped to follow. She thought about what it would mean to tell him. About his face, which she knew how to read better than any face she had ever known going from stillness to something dangerous. Thought about what it would cost him to come home to this. The fractures that were already in this family, that she did not want to be the thing that finished the break. She thought, I can survive this. She had survived harder rooms. She picked her fork back up. She finished her dinner. When Minhee offered dessert, she accepted it and said it was delicious, which it was. And she drove home alone in the dark, and she sat in her car outside the apartment. She and Kieran shared, and she let herself have 2 minutes exactly. She counted to feel every single thing she'd held back in that house. The anger, the humiliation, the loneliness of being the only person at a table who understands that the conversation had is not the conversation anyone is willing to name. 2 minutes. Then she went inside. Then she did not tell Kieran. That was the first time. It was not the last. Over the following weeks, the dinners continued. Comments shifted in toneless, veiled, more deliberate, as though Minhee and Sora had taken Amara's silence as confirmation that the boundaries they were pushing did not, in fact, exist. Sora began making small references to women from prominent Korean families who had apparently been very fond of Kieran before Amara came along. The kind of reference that comes with a name, a small anecdote, A trailing sentence designed to plant something without technically saying anything. The aunts who had been coolly polite became coolly dismissive. At one dinner, Minhee referred to Amara 3 times as Kieran's wife, never by her name in a conversation where everyone else was referred to by name. Kieran's wife, not Amara, as though the name itself was already a concession Minhee wasn't willing to make. Every time Amara came home and thought, I'll tell him this week. Every time she thought of his face. Every time she didn't tell him. She was not perfect in this. She needs to be understood as she actually was, not as someone who handled everything with impossible grace. There were nights she lay awake at 3 in the morning, rehearsing responses she hadn't given. There was one Tuesday when she called her best friend Camille and cried on the phone for 40 minutes and then made Camille promise not to say anything to anyone. There was a Wednesday where she sat across from Kieran at breakfast and almost said it had the sentence in her mouth. Could feel it, and then he reached over and squeezed her hand without looking up from his phone. Just a reflex. Just a I know you're there. And she swallowed the sentence back down. She loved him too much to make him choose. That was not wisdom. She understood much later that it was a mistake. But it was a mistake that came from love, and that is the kind of mistake that is hardest to recognize from the inside. The dinner where everything broke open came on a Thursday night in November. Minhee had organized it more formally than the previous one's more relatives, 2 of Kieran's oldest associates and their wives, the kind of guest list that signaled an occasion. Amara had not known the scope of it until she arrived. She had come in the same quiet way she always came, prepared for the low-grade endurance that had become her version of normal in that house, and found a dining room set for 20 people and a mother-in-law who had, apparently, decided that the audience was finally large enough. Amara found her seat, not at Kieran's end of the table, which was empty, because Kieran was still in Chicago, because the dinner had been scheduled around his absence, without Amara understanding that was the point. And she sat down, and she put her napkin in her lap, and she told herself, 2 hours. You can survive 2 hours. She made it 90 minutes before it fell apart. It was Minhee who did it in the end. Not Sofasora was theater. This was something else entirely. Minhee stood to offer a toast, a thing that hadn't happened at previous dinners, a formality that gathered the room's attention, and she spoke warmly about family, about legacy, about the importance of honoring what had been built. She spoke about Kieran with the specific pride of a woman who understood her son's power and took personal credit for it. And then she looked at Amara. We are all aware that Kieran has made certain choices that surprised us, she said. Her voice was even, conversational, as though this were simply the natural next thing to say. And we have all, in our way, tried to extend welcome where it was possible. She paused. But wearing the ring, Minhee said, is not the same as earning the name. The room went still. Amara felt it move through her, not like a blow, but like cold water, the kind that takes a second to register and then registers everywhere at once. She did not stand up. She looked at Minhee and she held her gaze, and she did not let the tears that were forming. In her eyes she could feel them, which was its own humiliation. She did not let them fall. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs under the table, and she breathed, and she thought, he should know. He should know when he's not here, and that is not an accident. And then, from somewhere in the room, a voice that sounded like Sora's said something low, and the person beside her laughed, and that laughter small, careless, the kind that doesn't even fully understand what it's laughing at. That laughter was the thing that finally cracked something open in Amara's chest. She did not cry. She would not give them that. But she said quietly, to the table, and to no one in particular, and to every person in that room who had said nothing, I have been in this house every week, because I love my husband. I have sat at this table, and I have listened, and I have said nothing, because I did not want to put him in the position of having to choose between me and his family. Her voice did not shake. That was my choice. I made it. But I want you all to understand something. She looked at Minhee. I am not here to earn anything. I am here because Kieran asked me to be his wife. And whatever you think of that, she stopped, because the room, for the first time that evening, had gone genuinely silent. Not the careful, curated silence of before, A different kind. The kind that happens when someone else has entered the room. Amara turned her head slowly toward the doorway, and Kieran Seo was standing there. He was still in his coat. He hadn't been announced. He was standing in the doorway of his family's dining room, with 20 people staring at him in various stages of horror and calculation, and his face. His face was completely still, not calm, still, the way very deep water is still. And his eyes were on Amara, only on Amara. Nobody moved. That was the first thing, the absolute stillness that dropped over the dining room. Like a weighted blanket, 20 people simultaneously deciding that the safest thing to do was nothing at all. Forks that had been halfway to mouths stayed where they were. A woman near the far end of the table set her wine glass down, so carefully it made no sound. One of Kieran's associates, a broad man named Mr. Yoon, who had been laughing at something 30 seconds ago, went very still in his chair with the particular stillness of a man who has spent a long time in rooms where the wrong movement carries consequences. Kieran had not stepped fully into the room yet. He was still in the doorway, still in his coat charcoal gray, the one Amara had watched him button at 5 in the morning 4 days ago. There was a small cut above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there when he left, and his jaw held the particular tension of someone who had been traveling for hours and had arrived to find something he was not prepared for. Except the set of his shoulders said something different. The set of his shoulders said he had been prepared for exactly this. That the stillness on his face was not surprise. It was recognition. His eyes moved across the table and found Amara, and in the half-second before anything else happened, before his mother made a sound, before Sora shifted in her chair, before any of the 20 people in that room recalibrated in that half-second, something passed between Kieran and his wife that had no words attached to it. Just his eyes on her face and her face not looking away, and the understanding, immediate and devastating, that he had heard her, had heard all of it, or enough of it, which amounted to the same thing. Then he walked into the room. He didn't rush. He never rushed. That was one of the things about Kieran Seo that people who didn't know him always misread. They expected a man of his reputation to move like a threat, fast and declarative. He moved like a man who had never once been certain about whether the room would wait for him, because it always had. And it did now. 20 people watched him walk the length of the dining room without a word and stop behind Amara's chair. He put one hand on her shoulder. That was all. Just his hand, resting there. But the weight of it, Amara felt the weight of it go through her like something structural, like a wall that had just appeared where there had been open air, and she exhaled once, quietly, and pressed her lips together. Min-hee was the first one to speak. Of course she was. Kieran. Her voice was measured, almost warm. The voice of a woman who had decided that the correct response to her son appearing unexpectedly was to behave as though this were a pleasant surprise, and not the particular nightmare it actually was. "We didn't know you were coming home tonight. We would have set a place," he said it simply, not a question. Min-hee paused for exactly 1 second. "Of course. Don't bother." He didn't look at her. He was still looking at the table, at the specific geography of it, who was seated where, the physical arrangement of who was closest to his wife and what their expressions were doing. Reading the room the way he read everything, which was completely and without mercy. "We're not staying." The "we" landed in the room like a dropped stone. Sora, 3 seats down from Amara, on the left side of the table, made a small sound. Not quite a word, a recalibration, the sound of someone deciding quickly whether to speak or not. She decided to speak. "You just got here," she said. "You haven't even eaten. Mom put this dinner together for Sora." Just her name. That was all he said. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Sora closed her mouth. Amara was not looking at any of them. She was looking at the table in front of her, at the half-eaten plate she had been staring at when everything broke open, at the cloth, napkin still pressed flat under her hands. She was doing the specific mathematics of dignity that you do when you are sitting in a room full of people, and every single one of them is watching you. She was deciding how she stood up, how she held herself when she did it. She had been doing that kind of mathematics her entire life, and she was very, very tired of it. Kieran pulled her chair back. She stood, She didn't look at Minhee. She picked up her purse from where she'd hooked it on the chair leg, a small, automatic gesture, the muscle memory of a woman who never left anything behind in a room she wasn't sure she'd be welcome to come back to, and she walked beside him toward the door. They were almost through it when Minhee spoke again. Kieran. Her voice had changed. The warmth was gone. What was underneath it was something older and harder and more honest. We need to talk about this. He stopped. Amara felt his hand find the small of her back, not grabbing, just present, and she felt him decide something. She could always feel when he decided something. There was a particular quality to the silence around him when the decision had been made. Yeah, he said. He turned back around. His eyes went to Amara first, and then he said, quietly, "Wait for me in the car." Not an order. A request. He only asked like that when he meant it. She looked at him for a moment. Kieran. 5 minutes, he said. And his eyes said, "I need you out of this room for what comes next." She left. She walked through the front hallway and past the housekeeper, who was standing beside the coat closet, pretending to be invisible. And she pushed through the front door into the November cold. And she walked to the car, and she got in, and she sat in the dark, and she breathed. Inside, the dining room went to war. She didn't hear it. But she could reconstruct it later, from what Kieran told her, and what he didn't tell her, and the way he looked when he came out 14 minutes later. Not 5. 14, with his jaw set and something behind his eyes that she had only seen a handful of times, and always hoped not to see again. What happened was this. Kieran stood in that dining room, and he looked at his mother and he said, without raising his voice, "How long?" Minhee didn't pretend not to understand. This isn't about time. It's about, how long has this been happening? The room was still holding its collective breath. Yoon had quietly set down his napkin. The 2 aunts had found their laps extremely interesting. One of the associates' wives had physically shifted her chair, a 1/4 inch away from the table, the unconscious movement of a woman trying to be less visible. "Kieran, your wife is a lovely woman," Minhee said, and the way she said your wife had a specific geometry to it. Not hostile, but not full either. The way you say a word when you know the word, but have decided not to mean it completely. But you have to understand that this family has. She's been coming here for 6 weeks. His voice was flat. 6 weeks, and not one person at this table called me to say there was a problem. Not you, not Sora, not one of these people who eat at my table and use my name like it cost them nothing. He looked at the room. Not at anyone specifically at the whole room, which was somehow worse. Nobody. Sora said it wasn't our place too. It absolutely was your place. He looked at his sister, and something in his expression made her stop. It was exactly your place, because she's my wife, and your silence on this was not neutrality. You understand that? Watching it happen and saying nothing is not staying out of it. She could have said something herself, Sora said, and her voice had taken on a quality that was almost defensive, the voice of someone who knows they're losing the argument and is reaching for anything. She's not fragile. She chose to stay quiet. She stayed quiet, Kieran said, because she was trying to protect me from having to do exactly this. He looked at his sister steadily. Do you understand how much worse that makes it? That she sat in this house and took it because she didn't want to put me in the middle? Sora looked away. Minhee set her hands flat on the table. It was a gesture Kieran recognized. He'd inherited some version of it himself, the instinct to brace before saying something that was going to cost something. You love her, Minhee said. I don't question that. But love is not. Don't. His voice was quiet and absolute. Don't finish that sentence. I know every version of what comes after it, and none of them are things I'm willing to hear right now. Then when? Minhee looked at her son with an expression that was complicated, in the way that only a mother looking at a child she has fundamentally misunderstood can be complicated at part grief, part stubbornness, part the specific pain of a woman who has been powerful for a very long time and is feeling that power shift. You walk in here after 4 days and you hear 1 minute of a conversation and you decide, you know. I heard enough, he said it simply. I heard you tell my wife that wearing my ring doesn't make her worthy of my name. The dining room went so quiet that the sound of the refrigerator, running in the kitchen, 3 rooms away, was suddenly audible. Minhee said nothing. I heard that, Kieran said. In front of 20 people. In my own house. He looked at his mother for a long moment. My house, Mom. That I pay for. That I have paid for since I was 22 years old. My table, my guests, my wife. Each word separated out, deliberate. And you stood up and said that to her face. Minhee's chin lifted slightly. I said what needed to be said. It was the wrong answer. Everyone at the table knew it was the wrong answer. The air in the room changed the way air changes before a very specific kind of storm. Not wind, not noise, just pressure, a shift in the quality of the atmosphere. Kieran looked at his mother for a very long time. Then he said, okay. Just that. Okay. And the way he said it quiet, almost gentle, the way you say "okay" when you've just been handed the answer to a question you've been asking for years, was the most frightening thing anyone in that room had heard all evening. He turned to look at the table, at Yoon, who met his eyes briefly, and then dropped his gaze. At the aunts, at the cousin, at the associate whose wife had shifted her chair. Anyone at this table, he said, who participated in what happened here tonight, whether that means you said something, or you laughed, or you sat here and did nothing. He paused. I'll remember that. I don't make lists, but I remember. Nobody spoke. He turned back to his mother one more time. We're going to talk again, he said. But not tonight. Tonight I'm taking my wife home. He walked out. In the car, Amara watched him cross the driveway and felt her stomach drop at the look on his face. Not anger. She could handle his anger. Had seen it, knew its shape. This was something else. Something quieter and colder and infinitely more serious. He got in. He started the car. He drove for approximately 4 minutes before either of them said anything. And in those 4 minutes, the only sounds were the heater and the road, and the particular silence of two people who are both holding something very large and haven't yet decided how to set it down. Then Amara said, "How much did you hear?" "Enough." His eyes stayed on the road. "Kieran." "I heard enough, Amara." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the lights of other houses slid past in the dark. Normal houses. Houses where, she imagined, the people inside them were watching television and eating leftovers and not sitting in cars, trying to figure out how to talk about the fact that their family had spent 6 weeks systematically, trying to make them feel like a mistake. "I was going to tell you," she said. "When?" The question was direct, and it hurt in the specific way that direct questions hurt when you know the honest answer doesn't reflect well on you. "I don't know," she said. He made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite anything. 6 weeks. You sat in that house every week. "I know, Kieran. And you didn't say anything to me." He finally looked at her briefly at a red light. His eyes were searching in a way that she recognized as him trying to understand something that genuinely did not compute. "Why?" "And I need the real answer. Not the one where you say you were protecting me. That is the real answer. It's part of it." She was quiet. He was right. It was part of it. The other part, the one she had not fully admitted even to herself, was that she had been afraid. Not of his family, of what it would mean if she told him, and he didn't respond in a way that was enough. She had spent 11 months learning to trust Kieran Seo, had married him knowing full well the complications that came attached to his name and his world, and at the bottom of all of it, underneath the love and the certainty and every moment that had made her choose him, was the old fear. The one that had nothing to do with him, specifically, and everything to do with every room she had ever walked into where her presence was treated as a question rather than a fact. What if she told him and he smoothed it over? What if he came home and had a gentle conversation with his mother and called it handled and nothing changed? What if she discovered that the protection she believed he would offer was not in practice, in the specific application of it, what she had believed it was? She hadn't been ready to know the answer to that. "I was scared," she said. He didn't say anything immediately. He pulled off the highway, and they were in familiar streets now, 10 minutes from home, and she could see in his jaw that he was processing what she had said with the same thoroughness he applied to everything. "Of what?" he asked. "Quiet. Of finding out what you do about it." The silence that followed that sentence was different from the others. It had weight in it. He turned onto their street and pulled into the parking structure and cut the engine, and they sat for a moment in the underground dark with the engine ticking, as it cooled. That's not he started. I know, she said. I know that's not fair. I know it sounds like I didn't trust you. Did you? She looked at him. The parking was dim light. His face was shadowed in a way that made him look older, or maybe just more tired, the kind of tired that isn't about sleep. I trusted you, she said carefully. I wasn't sure I trusted what you'd be willing to do. He took that in. She watched him take it in, watched him hold it, the way he held things that had to be felt before they could be filed. And she waited because pushing Kieran before he was ready to respond was like pushing a wall, and she had learned that years ago. I would have handled it, he said finally. I know that now. I would have handled it 6 weeks ago. I know. So you didn't stop. Rubbed one hand over his face. You thought I'd what? Choose them? No. She was honest. I thought you'd try not to choose. I thought you'd try to make it work for everyone. And I didn't want you in that position. And I didn't want to be the woman who made you choose. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, that wasn't your call to make. And the thing was, he was right. She had made a unilateral decision to protect him from something that was happening to her, and in doing so she had taken from him the chance to be the person she needed him to be. She had managed him, and she had done it with love, and she had done it wrong. I know, she said, Amara. His voice had changed. Lower. He turned in his seat to look at her directly. If something is happening to you, I need to know. I don't care what it costs me. Do you understand that? Yes. I need you to actually understand it, not just say it. She looked at him, at the cut above his eyebrow, at the exhaustion she could now see clearly was not just travel, was something that had been sitting in him, maybe for longer than tonight. She thought about what it must have been like to walk into that room, to stand in the doorway and hear his wife's voice saying, I have endured this for weeks because I love him. Okay, she said. I understand. He nodded once. He got out of the car. She followed him. The next 3 days were not easy. That needs to be said directly, because there is a version of the story where Kieran's confrontation in the dining room resolved something, where the weight lifted and the marriage emerged from the moment clarified and clean. That version is not what happened. What happened was messier and more human, and in some ways more painful than the original wound. Kieran was not angry at Amara, not exactly. But there was something in him that had been disturbed, some understanding of his own household that had been revealed to be incomplete, and he moved through the next few days with a quality of attention that felt almost like surveillance, and watching her in ways she was aware of, checking in with a frequency that was loving and also slightly suffocating, as though proximity could retroactively protect her from something that had already happened. She told him this on the second night. You're hovering? She said. They were in the kitchen. She was making tea. He was leaning against the counter, with his arms crossed and his eyes on her, which had been the posture for approximately 48 hours. I'm standing in my kitchen. You've been standing in whatever room I'm in for 2 days. That's not. He stopped, uncrossed his arms. I'm not hovering. You watch me eat breakfast. I was also eating breakfast. Kieran. She turned around and looked at him with the cup in her hands and the steam rising between them. I don't need a guard. I need a husband. He looked at her for a long moment and then said, those might be the same thing. They're not, she said. A guard keeps things from happening to you. A husband helps you figure out what to do when they already have. He was quiet. Then he uncrossed his arms and sat down at the kitchen table, which was the closest thing to deflating that Kieran Seo was capable of, and he said, I keep thinking about how many times you drove home from that house alone. I know. And I wasn't. He shook his head. I was in Chicago. You had to be. That's not the point. He looked at the table. Point is that my wife was getting. He stopped again. And the word he was not saying sat in the room between them, which was humiliated. And neither of them needed to say it because they could both feel its shape. I'm okay, she said. You shouldn't have had to be. She came and sat across from him and set the tea between them like a small practical truce. You're right, she said. I shouldn't have had to be. And we're going to have to talk about what happens next. With your mother, with Sora, with all of it. But tonight, I need you to stop watching me like I'm going to break. Are you? He looked at her directly, not dramatic. genuinely asking. No, she said, but I might if you keep doing this face. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. The first one in 3 days. What face? The face where you look like someone stole something from you. He looked away, then back. Someone did steal something from me, he said quiet. 6 weeks of being able to fix it. 6 weeks I could have. You can't have them back, she said. So what are you going to do with the time you've actually got? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I'm going to call my mother. He called Minhee the following morning. Amara was in the next room and did not listen, but she heard the tone of it controlled, prolonged, with silences on his end that were the silences of a man listening to things he has expected and still finds difficult to hear. It lasted 22 minutes. When he came back into the room, his expression was the specific expression of a person who has just placed a load down and is deciding whether they feel better or worse without it. She wants to meet, he said. Amara looked up from her drafting work. With you? With us. She was quiet. You don't have to, he said immediately. I know, seriously. I can… Kieran. She set her pencil down. What did she say? He sat down. He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone constructing a sentence carefully. She said she didn't mean it the way it came out. Amara waited. She said she was trying to… He stopped. She's going to say she was trying to prepare you for the way other people in this world would see you. That she was being honest. That's not an apology. No, he agreed. It's not. Is that what she thinks it was? He rubbed the back of his neck. She thinks it was a difficult truth that someone needed to say. She thinks she was doing… He shook his head. She thinks she was doing something for you. That's the part that's… He didn't finish. She believes that, Amara said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Amara sat with that for a moment. There was something almost more exhausting about that than about simple malice. Malice, she knew how to fight. Conviction was harder, the deep, settled certainty of a woman who genuinely believed that humiliating her daughter-in-law in front of 20 people was a form of help. Okay, she said. Set the meeting. Kieran looked at her. You sure? No, she said, but set it anyway. He nodded. Then he said, there's something else. She went still at his tone. It had changed Gone from the careful neutrality of the phone call, debriefed to something with a different texture, something she couldn't immediately identify. Sora called me this morning, he said, before my mother did. And he put both hands flat on the table. It was the same gesture his mother had made, at the dinner, the bracing gesture, and seeing it on him sent a low, cold feeling through her chest. She told me some things, he said, about what's been happening. Kieran, not just the dinners. He looked at her. She told me about other things, business things, about the way she's been… He stopped. She's been using my accounts and my name, with vendors, with some of the family associates, with… He shook his head. It's been happening for a while, and I didn't see it because I trusted her, and because when I asked about certain invoices, she said they were operational costs, and I believed her because she's my sister. Amara stared at him. Why is she telling you this now? 'Cause she's scared, he said. Because she thinks I'm about to find it myself, which I am, and she'd rather come to me first. Is that the whole reason? He was quiet for a long moment. She also said he stopped again, rubbed his jaw. She said she knew what was happening at the dinners was wrong. While it was happening, she said she knew. The room was very still. She thought it would stop on its own, he said. She thought he couldn't finish it. If I left, Amara said. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. Amara stood up slowly. She walked to the window. Outside, the city moved in its normal way, oblivious, indifferent, the permanent ongoing business of the world. She pressed one hand against the glass and felt the cold come through it, and she thought about 6 weeks of Sunday dinners and carefully constructed smallness and a sister-in-law who had watched it happen and decided the problem would resolve itself when Amara gave up and walked away. She thought I'd leave, she said, not quite to him. Yeah, she counted on it. Amara, she turned around. Her voice was even, and it cost her nothing, because she had found the place in herself that was past the point of hot feeling and into something colder and much more serious. I need you to understand something. I'm not angry at your sister for not liking me. People don't have to like me. I'm angry because she had the power to stop it and she let it continue because she thought it would solve a problem for her. Kieran looked at her from across the room. Do you understand the difference? She said. Yes, he said. He said it immediately, which meant he had already understood. Good. She came back to the tables and sat down. So what are you going to do about it? He looked at her steadily. I'm going to find every account she has access to, and I'm going to close them. I'm going to have someone go through the invoices from the last 18 months. And I'm going to sit down with her and make clear that what she's been doing financially, and otherwise, is over. And the businesses she's been involved in, she's done in those. Amara nodded slowly. Amara, his voice was different now. Not the measured voice of a man running through decisions, but something more unguarded. I'm sorry. I know that. I know that's not enough. I know me saying it doesn't undo any of it. But I need you to know that if I had known, I know, she said. I know you didn't know. I should have seen it. Maybe. No, not maybe. He shook his head. I know my sister. I know what she's capable of when she feels like something threatens her position. I knew it and I didn't. I was not paying enough attention to my own house. There was something in his face that was genuinely raw, not performance. The specific look of a man confronting the exact width of his own blind spot. You love her, Amara said. She's my sister, I know. That's not going to be easy. What comes next with her? No, he said. Are you going to be able to do it? He looked at her with an expression that was very tired and very certain at the same time. Choice. You always have a choice. Not this one. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not with you. She looked at their hands for a moment. The meeting with your mother, she said. Yeah, I'll be there. He squeezed her hand once. But Kieran, she looked up. I need you to hear me when I tell you what I need from it. Not what you think she should say, what I actually need. Okay. I need her to understand that I am not going to keep performing for this family. I'm not going to keep proving myself at dinner tables. If she can't look at me as your wife without it being a statement about bloodlines and worthiness and whatever else, she stopped. Then she and I don't have a relationship. And that's her loss, not mine. Kieran looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said. Okay as in you heard me? Or okay as in you agree? Both, he said. The word landed differently than it usually did. Not as agreement to a proposition, but as something structural, a foundation being adjusted, a wall being built in the right place this time. She felt it move through her, the same way his hand on her shoulder had moved through her in the dining room, like something solid, appearing where there had been open air. Okay, she said. She picked her pencil back up. He stayed at the table. Outside, the city kept moving. And the next morning, Soraseo arrived at the apartment without calling first, which was exactly the kind of mistake that people made when they were frightened and had run out of more careful options, and she knocked on the door 3 times. And when Amara opened it, not Kieran, Amara, because Kieran was in the shower, and Amara was the one who got to the door. First, Sora stood in the hallway with her coat still on, and her jaw set and her eyes carrying the specific expression of a woman who has prepared a speech and is no longer. Certain it applies, and she looked at Amara, and she said, I need to talk to you. Just you. Amara did not step back from the door. That was the first thing, the instinct she overrode, the reflex to create space, to give ground, to make room the way she had been making room in that family for 6 weeks. She stood in the doorway of her own apartment, and she looked at Soraseo, and she did not move. Sora was not what she expected. That was the second thing. She had expected the version of Sora from the Dinners Composed, blade sharp, the particular cruelty of a woman who knows exactly which words leave marks and how to deliver them with a smile. What was standing in the hallway was something different. Sora's coat was buttoned wrong, one button off, the whole thing slightly crooked, and there were shadows under her eyes that suggested she had not slept, and her jaw was set in the way of someone trying to hold together something that was already separating. Amara looked at her for a moment, then she said, Kieran's here. I know, Sora's voice was flat. I need to talk to you. Before the meeting with Mom. I need to say something to you first. Why? Sora blinked, as though she hadn't expected the question to be that direct. Because it matters. That's not an answer. Something shifted in Sora's face. Not quite pain, more like the expression of someone who has rehearsed a moment extensively and is discovering that the actual moment has a different texture than the rehearsal. "Can I come in?" she said. Amara considered it. She could hear the shower still running in the back of the apartment. She thought about calling for Kieran. She thought about what Sora had said on the phone to him. I knew it was wrong while it was happening, and she thought about the specific quality of cowardice that required to watch something happen to another person, calculate whether stopping it would cost you more than letting it continue. She stepped back from the door. Sora came in. She looked around the apartment with the brief, involuntary assessment of someone who has always had opinions about spaces, and then she stopped looking around and looked at Amara instead. "Sit down," Amara said. "Not a question." Sora sat. Amara stayed standing. She crossed her arms and she waited, because she was done being the person who made things easier for people who hadn't extended her the same courtesy. Sora set her bag on the floor beside the chair. She pressed her hands together in her lap. She said, "I want to tell you that I'm sorry, but I know that's not the thing you need from me right now, so I'm going to say the other thing first." "What other thing?" Sora looked up. Her eyes were direct in a way they hadn't been at the dinners, no performance behind them, no calculation. Just something tired and cornered, and Amara realized genuinely afraid. "There's something you don't know," Sora said, "about why my mother pushed this as hard as she did. About what she's been." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "It's not just about you being black. I need you to understand that. It's not just that." Amara's arms tightened slightly against her chest. "Then what is it?" Sora looked down at her hands. "Before you and Kieran got serious before, he told any of us you were someone he was actually thinking about marrying. My mother had been having conversations with another family. Park family. Do you know who they are?" "No, they're based in Flushing. Second generation. The father has connections to import businesses that overlap with some of Kieran's operations on the distribution side." Sora's voice had taken on a quality that was almost clinical, the voice of someone delivering information they've been holding for a long time and have finally decided to release. "My mother she'd been laying groundwork for years, for a connection between our family and theirs, through Kieran." Amara went very still. "There's a daughter," Sora said. "Jeon Park, 28. They'd met twice years ago at family functions. Kieran never. He wasn't interested. He was always clear about that. But my mother," Sora stopped. She kept the channel open. "With the Parks. She kept telling them that Kieran was still deciding what he wanted, that he hadn't found the right situation yet. While he was with me," Amara said. "While he was with you, yes." The shower had stopped. Somewhere in the back of the apartment, Amara could hear Kieran moving, the sound of a drawer, footsteps. The ordinary sounds of a morning that was no longer ordinary. "How long?" Amara asked. "The whole time. From the first time Kieran mentioned you, my mother started managing the situation with the Parks, telling them it was temporary, that it wouldn't last." Sora looked up, and her voice cracked, slightly at the edge. "She told them you were a phase." The word landed in the room and sat there. A phase. Amara breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, and she said, very carefully, "Is that still happening? These conversations with the Parks they still happening?" Sora hesitated. "1 second too, Sora." Amara's voice dropped. "Is it still happening?" "There was a dinner," Sora said. "Last month. My mother had dinner with Mr. Park and his daughter. In the city." She didn't tell Kieran. She paused. She told them that that it was having difficulty. That it might not. Stop. Amara's voice was so controlled it had no temperature. She told them the marriage was failing. She implied it. While I was sitting at her table every Sunday. Yes. The room felt different. Not smaller. Amara didn't experience it that way. More like the walls had shifted slightly. The way rooms feel different when you understand something about them that you didn't understand before. She had thought she had genuinely believed that what Minhee had been doing was an expression of personal feeling. Bias, cruelty, the territorial instinct of a woman who had decided her family's bloodline was worth protecting at someone else's expense. She had not understood it was a strategy. She had not understood that every Sunday dinner, every careful humiliation, every wearing the ring doesn't make you worthy of the name had been calculated not just to make her feel small, but to make her leave. To create the fracture that would allow Minhee to go back to the parks and say, "You see, I told you now. Here's my son. He is available again." Kieran walked into the room. He stopped immediately. He looked at Sora first, then at Amara, and something in his face shifted the rapid, experienced reading of a man who has walked into many rooms with changed air and knows how to assess them. "What's happening?" he said. Not a question. Nobody answered for a moment. Then Amara said, "Your sister was telling me something." Kieran looked at Sora, his jaw tightened. "The parks," Amara said. The word hit him differently than she expected. His expression didn't change exactly, but something in it settled, in the way of a man who has just had a suspicion confirmed that he had been hoping to have denied. "You knew," Amara said. "I knew about the parks. Years ago." He came further into the room. "I knew my mother had ideas about that family. I told her clearly that I wasn't interested, and I thought—" He stopped. His eyes moved to Sora. "I thought it was over." "She's been in contact with them," Sora said. Since before the wedding, the silence that followed was the particular silence of a moment that reorganizes everything around it. Kieran sat down. He put his elbows on his knees and he put his face in his hands for exactly 3 seconds. Just 3, she counted, and then he came back up, and his expression was the expression she had never wanted to see, the one she had thought about on those nights she'd chosen not to tell him. Not broken, something worse. The expression of a man who trusted completely and has just discovered the precise dimensions of the space that trust left open. "Why are you telling us this now?" he asked Sora. His voice was very quiet. Sora looked at her brother. "'Cause Mom is going to the meeting tomorrow with a plan," she said. "She's going to come in and she's going to apologize, and she's going to be very good at it, Kieran. She's going to say what needs to be said to make it seem like things are going to change. Sucks. And then she's going to go back to the parks." "How do you know that?" "Because I talked to her last night." Sora's voice was unsteady now, just slightly at the edges. "I told her what I'd told you about the accounts, about the invoices. And she wasn't angry about that. She was angry that I'd told you, and she said—" She stopped. "What did she say?" Kieran asked. Sora looked at her brother steadily. "She said that you were going through a phase, that you'd see clearly when it was over." She used the exact word. Her eyes briefly moved to Amara and then back. "She thinks if she waits long enough, if she manages this correctly, that you'll—" "She thinks I'll leave," Amara said. "She's certain of it," Sora said. She said men like Kieran come back to what makes sense eventually." The room went absolutely still. Amara felt something she did not have a clean word for move through her. Not anger, exactly, though anger was in it. Something more fundamental than that. The feeling of understanding finally, and completely what she had been walking into every Sunday for 6 weeks. Not a family in adjustment. Not a mother who needed time. A woman who had looked at Amara and decided she was an obstacle and had developed a patient, meticulous, and ongoing plan for removing her. She had sat at that table and eaten that food and tried, actually tried, and the whole time across the table from her was a woman who had already decided how the story ended and was simply waiting for Amara to reach the ending herself. Kieran stood up. He stood up and he moved to the window, and he stood there with his back to them both, for a moment. And the set of his shoulders was the set of someone who is sorting through something that has too many pieces, and not enough of them are where they should be. Then he turned around. "The meeting," he said. "Tomorrow." Sora started. "Is she going to bring Gideon Park to it?" Sora blinked. No, it's just... "Is she going to contact the parks tonight?" Sora went quiet. "Sora, I don't know," she said. "Maybe, possibly." He looked at his sister for a long moment. "And you knew about all of this, the whole time." "Not all of it. I didn't know about the dinners she was having with them until—" "But you knew she was still in contact with them." Sora said nothing. "After the wedding," he said. "You knew she was still in contact with them after the wedding." Sora looked at her hands. "Yes." The word dropped into the room and did not bounce. Amara watched Kieran look at his sister, watched him stand there with everything he was feeling contained behind the expression he used when containment was the only option, and she saw the exact moment something changed in him. Not broke, changed. A recalibration that was not loud and was not dramatic and was, for that reason, more permanent than either of those things would have been. Get out, he said. Sora looked up. I don't mean, he stopped. Took a breath. I need you to go. Right now. We'll talk later, but right now I need you to go. Sora stood. She picked up her bag. She looked at Amara once, a look with something complicated in it, something that was not quite an apology and was not quite a plea, something in between those things that Amara filed away without responding to, and she went to the door and she left. The apartment was quiet. Kieran stayed at the window. Amara stayed where she was. The morning light came through the blinds in clean horizontal lines and fell across the floor between them, and neither of them moved for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 30 seconds. Then Amara said, "Are you okay?" He laughed. It was a short, sharp sound without any warmth in it. Not cruel. Just the involuntary sound of a person encountering the gap between what they expected and what is. "No," he said. "Okay. He shook his head. I had a conversation with my mother 4 years ago. I told her that the parks were not going to happen. Clear. I thought..." He pressed his hand against the window frame. "I thought she understood that." "She understood it," Amara said. "She just decided to wait." He looked at her. "She's patient," Amara said. "That she's very patient. And she loves you. In her way. That's what makes it complicated." "Don't do that," he said. Quiet. "What? Don't make it easier for me than it is." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not making it easier. I'm telling you the truth. She loves you, and she's been lying to you for a year, and those things are both true, and neither one cancels the other out." He turned away from the window. He came and sat down at the table, and he sat there with his hands flat on the surface, and his eyes on a point somewhere in front of him that had no particular feature, just space. "The meeting is still happening," he said. "Is it?" "Yes, but not the way she planned it." He looked up. "I need to know something from you first." "What?" "What do you want? Not what you'll accept. What you actually want." "From my mother. From this family. If you could, if there were no constraints on what was possible, what would you want to happen?" Amara sat down across from him. She thought about it honestly. She sat with it for a moment instead of answering immediately with the answer that sounded most reasonable. "I want your mother to understand that I'm not leaving," she said. "Not because I'm stubborn, and not because I'm making a point. Because I love you, and I chose this, and I'm not going to be managed out of my own marriage by a woman who decided before she met me that I wasn't the right kind of person." She paused. "I want her to look at me and see me. Not what I represent to her, not what problem I create for her plans me." Kieran was very still, "And I want you to stop." She stopped. "Say it. I want you to stop believing that if you manage this carefully enough, you can make everyone okay at the same time. Your mother, me, Sora, the business, all of it. You can't." She looked at him directly. "Something has to be first, and I need to know that I'm first." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're first," he said. "Kieran Amara." His voice was steady and quiet, and had no performance in it whatsoever. "You are first. You have been first since before I knew how to say it clearly. That's not something I'm deciding right now. That's something that was already true." She looked at his face. She looked at it carefully, the way you look at something when you need to know if it's real. It was real. "Okay," she said. They sat there for a moment with the morning light between them and the city, outside, going about its indifferent business. And then Kieran picked up his phone, and he called his mother, and when Minhee answered, he said, simply, "The meeting is still tomorrow. But I know about the parks. I know everything. And you need to decide tonight what you're going to come in with. Because if you come in with a performance, I will know." A silence on the other end. "I love you," he said. "But I'm done being managed by you. Come tomorrow and be honest, or don't come at all." He hung up. He set the phone on the table. Amara said nothing. He said, "She's going to come. I know. She's going to try to explain it. I know. It's going to be..." He stopped. "It's going to be a difficult conversation." "Yes," she said, "it is." He looked at her. Are you ready for it? She thought about the specific question he was asking, which was not, are you emotionally prepared, but something more precise. Are you going to be able to sit in that room with my mother and say the thing that needs to be said without either backing down or burning everything to the ground? Are you? She asked back. He picked up his phone again. He turned it over in his hand once. I'm going to find out tonight, he said. I have someone pulling the financials, all of it. The accounts Sora had access to. The invoices going back 18 months. I need to see the full scope before tomorrow. How bad is it? Don't know yet. He set the phone down. But I know it's bad enough that she came here this morning without being asked to. People don't do that unless the thing they're trying to get ahead of is bad enough to make them move before they're ready. Amara nodded slowly. There's something else, he said. She waited the Park family, he said. If my mother has been telling them the marriage was failing, if she's been keeping them positioned as an alternative, I have to consider that Mr. Park may have made certain arrangements based on that information. He paused. Certain operational arrangements that intersect with my businesses. Amara stared at him. What kind of arrangements? The import operations I mentioned, the distribution overlap. If Park has been conducting business with the understanding that he would eventually have a formal relationship with this family through Kieran, he stopped. He's been leveraging it, Amara said. The understanding came cold and immediate. He's been using the expectation of a connection to your family as currency. Possibly. Which means if the connection doesn't happen, he loses leverage he's been operating on for potentially a year. Kieran's voice was flat, and men who lose leverage look for ways to recover it. She sat with that for a moment. So this isn't just about your mother and what she thinks of me. It was never just about that. It affects your business. Yes. Does it put you in? She stopped. Started again. Are you safe? He looked at her. That's not your concern. Kieran. Her voice had an edge now. Don't do that. Don't put me in a separate category from what's happening in your life. That's the other side of the same problem. He was quiet for a moment. Then I don't know yet. I need to see the numbers first. And if Park is a problem, then I handle Park. He said it simply, the way he said simple things that were not simple at all, but that he had decided not to make complicated in front of her. She looked at him steadily. I need you to tell me what's actually happening. All of it. Amara, if something in your world has been affected by what your mother's been doing, if people out there have been operating on the assumption that our marriage isn't real or isn't going to last, I need to know that. Because that's not just your problem to manage. That's our problem. He looked at her for a long moment. She watched him decide. Watched him weigh the competing instincts protection against partnership, the old habit of managing things quietly against the understanding, still new and not fully settled, that managing things quietly was exactly what had put them both here. There may be a meeting with Park, he said finally. Not tomorrow. But this week, I'm going to have to address what my mother's been, what expectations may have been created. He looked directly at her. And it's not going to be a comfortable conversation. Did you ever speak to Jian Park directly? Once. Years ago. A dinner with both families. She was not interested in me any more than I was interested in her. She had her own life, her own plans. Whatever her father has been doing with this, I don't think she's... That's not the point, Amara said. I know. The point is that your mother has been using your marriage as a bargaining position in someone else's business dealings. Yes. And you're going to have to deal with the consequences of that. Yes. She sat back. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for a moment, not crying, just the gesture of a person who needs to apply pressure to something for a second before continuing. Then she dropped her hands. Okay, she said. What do you need from me? He looked at her. Nothing. Tonight I need you to... Kieran. She said his name with the specific weight she only used when she needed him to stop and actually hear her. I am not going to sit in another room while things happen around me. What do you need? He was quiet from me, she said. Specifically, not generally. What do you need tonight to be ready for tomorrow? He looked at her for a long time with an expression she couldn't fully read. Something complicated and honest and slightly undone. The expression of a man who has been asked a question he's not used to being asked. I need you to stay, he said. I'm not going anywhere. I know. His voice was low. I need you to stay the way you've been. The way you've been doing this. He shook his head slightly, reaching for the word. You haven't let them make you small. Even when you've been in that house every week, and you never let them see you break. And he stopped, pressed his lips together. I need to know that tomorrow, when my mother sits across from us, you're still that person. That they haven't, that what they've done hasn't made you into someone different than who you are. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, they didn't make me small. They tried. She picked up her pencil from where it had been sitting this whole time. She'd put it down when Sora knocked. She hadn't back up. She hadn't picked it back up. It had just been sitting there through all of it. She picked it up now. There's a difference. He watched her. Go look at your financials, she said. I have a project due Thursday, and I'm not going to lose a day because your family is having a crisis. He almost smiled, not quite. Almost he stood. He picked up his phone. He went to the other room. And Amara sat at the table with her pencil and her drafting work, and she stared at the lines on the paper in front of her, which were the lines of a building she was designing. A community center in the Bronx, clean angles, honest materials, structure meant to be used by people and not just looked at, and she thought about what Soros had said. She thinks if she waits long enough, you'll leave. She put her pencil to the paper. She's been certain of it. She drew the first line. She was still drawing when Kieran came back into the room 40 minutes later with his phone in his hand, and a look on his face that she had never seen before. Not the contained fury from the dining room, not the tired rawness of the night before. Something new, something that had no warm edges. The financials, he said. She set the pencil down. It's worse than I thought, he said. Significantly worse. She waited. Sora wasn't just using my accounts for operational costs. He sat down. He set the phone on the table so she could see the screen, and on the screen were numbers rows of them, 18 months of them, and she was an architect, not a financial analyst. But she had sat through enough project budget reviews to understand what she was looking at. She's been moving money, transferring it small amounts, consistent over the full period, into an account I had no knowledge of. Amara stared at the screen. She came here this morning to tell me about the parks, Kieran said. And she told me that to make sure she was the one who framed what I found. Before I found it myself, his voice was very even, very controlled. She told me about my mother to make sure I was looking at my mother when the financial review started. So I would think the account irregularities were connected to the park situation. To my mother. Amara looked up from the phone slowly. They're not, he said. They're Tyra's. Sora's. My mother has nothing to do with it. She stared at him. My sister, he said, has been stealing from me for a year and a half. And she came here this morning. She sat in that chair. He looked at the chair Sora had been sitting in, and she told me a version of the truth that was designed to make sure I didn't look too closely at the version she was hiding. Amara felt the room shift again. The second time in 2 hours, the second reorganization, the second moment of understanding something she had believed she already understood, and discovering that the shape of it was entirely different than she had thought. She said quietly, she knew you'd pull the financials. Yes. She came here to control what you found, yes. And the park's the dinner. What she told you about your mother's plan. Some of it is true, he said. My mother has been in contact with them. That part is real. But Sora used it. She used it as he stopped, set his jaw. She used my wife to cover her own theft. The sentence landed in the room with the full weight of what it was. Amara sat with it. She thought about Sora in the hallway. The coat buttoned wrong. The shadows under the eyes. The prepared speech that had the wrong texture for the moment. She had read it as fear. And it was fear she had been right about that, but she had assumed the fear was about Kieran, finding out what Sora knew about Minhee. She had not considered, not in the specific geography of everything she had been managing, thought to consider, that the fear was about something else entirely. That Sora had not come to confess. She had come to redirect. And Amara sittings in her own apartment, in the middle of her own marriage crisis, processing 6 weeks of systematic humiliation, had been the perfect audience for it. She looked at Kieran across the table, and she understood with a clarity that was cold and complete and had no comfortable edges, that she was not just someone's daughter-in-law in a difficult family. She was a piece on a board. She was a piece on a board from the beginning. And the question now, the question that Kieran was looking at her with across the table, the question that was in his eyes without words, was what she was going to do now that she knew it. She picked up her pencil. She set it back down. She said, "Call Sora back." Kieran looked at her. "Call her back," Amara said. "Tell her you need her here in 20 minutes. Don't tell her what you found." "Amara, she thinks she controlled what you saw this morning," she said. "Let her keep thinking that. For 20 more minutes." He looked at her steadily for a moment, reading her the way he read rooms. Then he picked up his phone. Minhee Seo arrived at 9:43 in the morning. Not 10 o'clock, which was when Kieran had told her to come. 17 minutes early, which meant she had been sitting in her car outside the building or circling the block, because Minhee Seo did not arrive at places 17 minutes early by accident. She arrived when she was ready, and readiness for her had nothing to do with the clock. It had to do with the particular internal arrangement of a woman who had spent 61 years learning how to walk into rooms on her own terms. Amara heard the knock and did not move from the kitchen. Kieran opened the door. He had come home at 4 in the morning. She'd been awake, lying in the dark listening to the city, and he had gotten into bed without saying anything, and she had not asked. And they had lain there in the dark for a while, and then he had said quietly, into the ceiling, "Lim is being handled." And she had understood that handled was a word that covered a territory. She was not going to ask him to map for her. And she had said, "Okay," and they had slept for 4 hours. He looked tired in the way that 4 hours of sleep, after a night of doing something that required complete control, looks tired, not wrecked, just worn at the edges. He was dressed. He'd shaved. He'd made coffee and stood at the window with it for 20 minutes before Minhee knocked, and Amara had watched him do it from the kitchen doorway and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the silence wasn't already saying. She heard Minhee come in. She heard the specific sound of her mother-in-law's footsteps, the deliberate, unhurried quality of them, heels against the hardwood, the sound of a woman who has decided that whatever is about to happen, she will not be rushed through it. Amara set down her coffee cup. She straightened her spine. She walked into the living room. Minhee was standing near the window, not seated, standing, which was its own statement. She was dressed the way she always dressed, which was impeccably, which Amara had once read as elegance, and now read as armor. She looked at Amara when she entered, and her expression did something complicated, a rapid, almost imperceptible sequence of adjustments, like a face trying to sell something in quick succession before settling on the one that revealed the least. "Amara," she said, Minhee. Amara did not say, "Please sit down." She did not say thank you for coming. She walked to the chair she had already decided she would sit in, not the couch, not anything that required sharing, and she sat, and she waited. Kieran came and stood near the kitchen doorway, not sitting, standing. Minhee looked at her son. Something moved across her face when she looked at him, something that was genuinely maternal, genuinely pained, the face of a woman who has been up all night as well, though for different reasons. Her eyes were dry. She had decided Amara could see that this morning would not include tears. Tears were a form of vulnerability, and vulnerability was a form of concession, and she was not ready to fully concede. She sat down on the couch. The three of them formed a triangle in the room, Minhee on the couch, Amara in the chair, Kieran at the doorway, and the geometry of it felt deliberate, though no one had explicitly arranged it. "Sora called me," Minhee said. "I know," Kieran said. "She told me." Minhee stopped. Her hands in her lap pressed together. "She told me everything." "Good," he said. Minhee looked at her hands for a moment. When she looked back up, she looked at Amara, not at Kieran. Amara felt the directness of it land, the specific weight of being looked at fully by a woman who had spent 6 weeks making a deliberate project of not fully seeing her. "I owe you an apology," Minhee said. Amara said nothing. "What I said at the dinner," Minhee paused. "What I have said and done over the past 6 weeks," she stopped again. She was having difficulty with it, which Amara recognized was genuine, not performance. not the managed difficulty of a woman deploying emotion strategically, but the actual difficulty of a person trying to say a thing they have never said and do not have fluent language for. I treated you in a way that was wrong. The room was very still. I told myself, Minhee continued, and her voice had the quality of someone who has spent the night doing something painful and is delivering the results of it, that I was protecting this family. That my concerns about legacy, about position, about how this family is perceived, I told myself those concerns were practical, that they were not about you personally. She paused. They were about you personally, she said. I need to say that clearly. What I did was not strategy, it was... Her jaw tightened slightly. It was prejudice, dressed in practical language. And I knew it, on some level, which is why I made sure the language stayed practical. So I didn't have to look at what it actually was. The sentence landed in the room and sat there. Amara looked at Minhee Seo, and she felt something move through her that was not forgiveness and was not vindication, either something more complicated than both of those things. The specific feeling of hearing a person say something true that you needed them to say, and discovering that the saying of it is both less and more than you expected. "And the Parks," Amara said. Minhee's chin lifted slightly. A reflex. Then she let it settle. "Yes. You were in contact with them throughout our marriage." "Yes. You told them the marriage was in difficulty." Minhee looked at her steadily. "I told them that the situation was unresolved." "That was the word I used." "That's a lie that knows it's a lie," Amara said. Something moved across Minhee's face. It might have been respect. It might have been pain. It was hard to separate the two. "Yes," she said. "It was. Why?" Amara asked. The question was direct, and she meant it directly, not as accusation, as a genuine attempt to understand the shape of what had been done and why. Minhee was quiet for a moment. "Because I was afraid," she said. Kieran made a sound from the doorway. Brief. Involuntary. "Not of you," Minhee said, looking at Amara. "Of losing him." "Of losing?" She stopped. "Kieran has always been the center of everything I built. His father was gone when Kieran was 17. Everything after that, the businesses, the family position, all of it, I held it. I kept it. And I told myself I was doing it for him, for the family, but..."
She stopped again.
Her hands pressed harder together in her lap. "I have been making decisions for this family since Kieran was 17 years old. And he has let me, because he loves me, because he understood what I sacrificed. And I mistook that." Her voice dropped slightly. "I mistook his tolerance for agreement. Thought because he didn't stop me, it meant I was right." The room was quiet. "And when he chose you," Minhee said, looking at Amara, "it was the first time in a very long time that he did something I could not manage. Could not adjust, and I did not know what to do with that. So I tried to manage it anyway. You tried to make me leave," Amara said. "Yes. You wanted me to get tired enough, and small enough, and invisible enough that I'd decide to go." "Yes." The word was quiet and undecorated, and landed with the weight of something finally set down after being carried too long. Kieran pushed off the doorway. He walked into the room, and he sat down not beside his mother, not beside his wife, in the chair that was between them, and he sat there with his elbows on his knees, and his hands loose between them, and he looked at his mother. "I need you to understand something," he said. His voice was not loud. It was the voice he used when he needed the words to reach very specifically, the way a precise cut reaches. "I'm not choosing between you. I need you to understand that frame, and I need you to let it go, because it has been driving every decision you've made about this marriage, and it is wrong." Minhee looked at her son. "There is no choice between you and Amara," he said. "She is my wife. That is not a variable. That is the fixed point. Everything else, your relationship with her, your relationship with me, how this family operates, how decisions get made, all of that is negotiable. But her place in this marriage is not." Minhee said, "Kieran, I'm not finished." He said it without heat. "I have let you operate in my family's life with a level of authority that I gave you because I was grateful, and because I love you, and because after Dad died, you held things together in a way that cost you enormously. And I have never stopped being aware of that cost. But I made an error." He paused. "I let gratitude become deference." And deference became permission. And you took the permission and you did something with it that hurt my wife for 6 weeks while I was not paying enough attention. Minhee's eyes were bright, still dry. That ends, he said. The authority you've had in my businesses, in the household decisions, in the family, it gets restructured. Not because I'm punishing you, because the version of it that existed was never appropriate and I should have addressed it years ago. Minhee said nothing. And the parks, he said, are finished. Whatever conversation has been ongoing with that family ends today. I'll make a call this afternoon and I'll be clear. And if that creates a business problem, that's a business problem I will handle. The operational overlap. Minhee started. I'll handle it, he said. Kieran, the Park family has connections. That. Mom, his voice went very quiet. I need you to hear me say this one time, clearly. This conversation is not about business. Not right now. Right now, this conversation is about you and my wife and what you are going to do with the rest of your relationship with her. That's the only thing on the table in this room. Minhee looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Amara. Amara had not moved. She had been watching this exchange with the specific quality of attention she brought to things that mattered complete, unblinking, missing nothing. She was not performing composure. She was composed because the alternative was to hand this moment to something other than clarity, and she needed clarity too much to let it go. What do you need from me? Minhee asked her. The question was direct. More direct than anything Minhee had said to her since they'd met, and Amara recognized the cost of it, the specific cost for a woman like this, a woman whose entire operational framework was built on never asking, only directing. Amara took a breath. I need you to use my name, she said. Every time. In every room. When you speak about me to other people in this family, I need you to say Amara. Not Kieran's wife. Not some implied reference that lets everyone understand you're not fully acknowledging me. My name. Minhee nodded. Once. I need the dinners to change, Amara said. I'm not asking to be celebrated. I'm asked to be a person in the room. Included in conversations. Spoken to directly. Not compared to women you think Kieran should have married. That won't happen again, Minhee said. I need to know you mean that, Amara said. Not because you're afraid of what Kieran will do. Because you understand why it was wrong. Minhee was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face that was difficult to watch, not because it was manipulative, but because it was real. The specific expression of a woman confronting the distance between who she believed herself to be and who she has actually been. I am working on understanding that, Minhee said carefully. I cannot tell you I fully understand it yet. I can tell you I am willing to try. It was the most honest thing she'd said. Amara received it. That's enough for today, she said. Kieran looked at his wife. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes. Logistics, mostly, the practical architecture of what changed and how. Minhee would step back from the role she'd had in oversight of 3 of Kieran's subsidiary businesses. The family account structures would be reorganized. The contact with the parks would end formally, and Kieran would handle the operational implications himself. None of it was comfortable. All of it was necessary. When Minhee finally stood to leave, she paused at the door. She looked at Amara with the expression of someone who has several more things to say and is deciding whether any of them are ready to be said. She said, I am sorry, Amara. She used the name. Amara looked at her. I know, she said. After Minhee left, the apartment was very quiet. Kieran stood at the door for a moment after closing it, his hand still on the handle, his back to the room. Amara watched him stand there. Then he turned around. You didn't let me handle it, he said, not accusatory. Almost wondering. You handled your part, she said. I handled mine. He looked at her for a moment. Are you okay? She thought about it honestly. I'm tired, she said. I'm not broken. There's a difference. He crossed the room, and he sat beside her on the couch, and he put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, not collapsing, just leaning, the specific lean of someone who has been holding their own weight for a long time and has found somewhere safe to briefly redistribute it. They sat like that for a while. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His jaw tightened. Who is it? She asked. Mr. Park, he said. She pulled back slightly so he could move. He stood. He looked at the phone for one more ring. Then he answered it, and he walked toward the window, and his voice, when he spoke, was the voice he used for things she wasn't part of controlled, specific, and carrying beneath the words a particular quality that made clear to whoever was on the other end of the line that they were speaking to a man who had already decided how this conversation was going to go. She listened to the tone of it without hearing the words. 3 minutes. 4. Then he said something brief and final sounding, and he ended the call. He stood at the window for a moment. Problem? She asked. Manageable, he said. That's not the same as no. He turned around. Park wants a meeting. In person. He paused. He has information. He says he wants to return to me. Information that came through an intermediary. Amara went still. Lim. Possibly. Why would he give it back? Because he wants something in exchange. He looked at her steadily. He wants the operational relationship preserved. He wants to continue the business overlap we've had. And he wants Kieran stopped. He says it was never his intention to create a problem. That what happened with Lim was, he says it was Lim acting independently. Do you believe that? Kieran was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he said. I need to meet him. When? Tonight. Amara nodded slowly. And the information Lim gathered, how bad is it? Kieran looked at her. I don't know yet what he has. That's what the meeting is about. Is it safe? The meeting? Park isn't. He's not operational the way I'm operational. He's a businessman who has some connections on the margins of certain things. He stopped. It's not that kind of risk. But there's a risk. There's always a risk, he said. Not dismissive, honest. The honesty of a man who doesn't have the option of pretending otherwise and has chosen not to pretend. She stood up. She walked to where he was standing, and she looked at him directly. Come home, she said. I will tonight, whatever time it is. Come home. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his eyes that was not sentimentality, deeper than that, more structural. The look of a man who is looking at the thing he's protecting and feeling the full weight of what that means. Yeah, he said. He left at 6. The apartment was quiet. Amara went back to her drafting table. She worked for 2 hours, real work, focused work, the kind that required full attention, and got it because she knew how to make herself focus, and because the alternative was sitting in the quiet and imagining the things she couldn't know, and she was done imagining things she couldn't know. She drew clean lines. She made precise decisions about angles and materials and load-bearing structures, and she found, as she always did, that the work was its own form of stability. At 8:15, her phone rang. Camille, she answered. Hey, don't hey me, Camille said. I've been calling all day. I know, it's day. Several days. Talk to me, Camille said. And Amara did. Not everything, not the operational parts, not Lim, not the details that weren't hers to share. The meeting, Minhee, the apology and what it contained and what it didn't contain yet. The name Minhee said my name, Camille. She actually said it, and Camille was quiet for a moment after that, and then said, that doesn't sound like much. And Amara said, it's not nothing. And Camille said, no. It's not nothing. They talked for 40 minutes. When she hung up, the apartment felt less like a space she was occupying alone, and more like a place she lived. 10:07, a text from Kieran on my way back. Park meeting done. We need to talk. She stared at the words we need to talk for a moment, and then she put the phone face up on the table, and she went to the kitchen, and she put water on, because whatever needed to be talked about, it was better to talk about it with something warm in front of them. He came home at 10:49. He looked not how she'd feared. Not hurt, not compromised. Tired in the same worn at the edges way from the morning, but the edges had a different quality. Something had resolved. Something had at minimum been contained. He sat at the kitchen table. She put tea in front of him. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her. Park didn't know about the transfers, he said. I believe him. Lim was freelancing using the access Sora gave him to gather leverage he could use independently. He wasn't working for Park. He was working for himself. Where is he now? Being found, Kieran said. Flat. That's being handled. And the information he has? Park doesn't have it. Lim does. And Lim, he stopped. Lim made an error when he ran. He ran in a direction that was, he shook his head slightly. It was not a well-planned exit. She understood that she was not going to get more than this. She accepted it. The operational relationship with Park, she said. Are you maintaining it? For now, with conditions. If his business and mine continue to overlap, it's on terms I dictate. Not terms that were established on the assumption of a family alliance that doesn't exist. He looked at her steadily. I was clear with him about that. How did he take it? He took it the way people take things when they don't have a better option, Kieran said. Which is to say, he agreed. She nodded. He picked up the tea. He didn't drink it. He just held the cup and looked at the surface of it, and she watched him do it and waited because there was still something in his face that hadn't been said. Sora, he said. Yeah, she's going to need help that I can't give her. He looked up. The money can be repaid. I don't need her to repay it. But it needs to be addressed formally. A lawyer. A plan. She can't act like it didn't happen. She knows that. And Lim stopped. She loved him. Whatever he was doing, he set the cup down. She loved him, and he used it, and that's going to be something she has to live with. Yes, Amara said. She didn't soften it. Softening it would have been a disservice. I can't be the person she processes that with, he said. Not right now. Maybe not for a while. She has other people, Amara said. She'll find her way to them. He looked at her. You told her to call her mother. Yes, and to get a lawyer. Yes, he stopped. Looked at her with the expression she'd been seeing more and more of in the last 48 hours, the one that had no performance in it. Just genuine, slightly undone attention. You handled my sister better than I could have. I handled her the way she needed to be handled, Amara said. Which is different from how you would have handled her, because you love her in a way that makes it complicated. You don't love her. Not yet, she said. But I might. Eventually, if she does the work. He was quiet for a long time. He shook his head slightly. Not a dismissal. The gesture of a man encountering something that exceeds the available vocabulary. I'm not a saint, she said. I'm practical. Sora being in my life in a functional way is better for this marriage than Sora being a permanent wound in it. That's not generosity, it's architecture. I understand load-bearing structures. He looked at her. Don't look at me like that, she said. Like what? Like I did something extraordinary. I had a hard conversation. That's all. You had about 6 hard conversations today, he said. Yes, and tomorrow I'll probably have more. She picked up her own cup. That's marriage, Kieran. That's just what it is. He reached across the table. His hand covered hers on the cup. She let him hold it there. The kitchen was warm, and the city outside was doing what the city always did, and the apartment had the specific quality of a place where very large things had happened and been, if not resolved, then at least honestly faced. She thought about Minhee saying her name. She thought about Sora's shaking hands. She thought about the cut above Kieran's eyebrow, and she thought, I'm going to ask him about that. Not tonight, but soon. Tomorrow, he said. What about it? The family dinner. I want to have it. Here. He looked at her steadily. Not my mother's house. Here, our table. She looked at him. Who? My mother. Sora, if she's ready. The 2 aunts who were at the dinner last month. Why the aunts? Because they were there, he said simply. They heard what was said to you, and they said nothing. They should be in the room when things are different. She thought about it. About a table in her own apartment. About sitting at the head of it, not because anyone seated her there, but because it was her table and her home, and that was simply the way it would be. Okay, she said. You sure? She looked at him. I want to be clear about something.
Okay.
I'm done being a guest in this family, she said. I'm done managing my presence to make other people comfortable. If we have this dinner, I sit at my own table, as myself. Not the version of myself that's been performing adequacy since October. That's the only version I want at my table, he said. Then yes, I'm sure. He squeezed her hand. She turned her hand over under his and held it. They stayed like that for a while. The tea cooled. Neither of them moved to reheat it. Then his phone buzzed on the table, and he looked at the screen, and his expression changed, went back. In an instant, to the controlled alertness of a man whose world had not stopped requiring his attention simply because his kitchen was warm and his wife was beside him. She watched his face. "Lim?" "Yes," he said. He stood. She released his hand. He looked at her, that look, the one she was learning, and she gave him the small nod that meant, "Go, I'm here. I know what this is." And he went into the next room, and she heard his voice drop into the register it used for things that required precision and weight. She picked up the cold tea. She looked at the table. She thought about tomorrow, about a dinner in her own home with her mother-in-law, who had used her name for the first time today, as though learning a new word for a thing she'd been trying to name correctly. About Sorfat, somewhere in the city, sitting with the ruins of a plan she'd built on someone else's deception, and figuring out who she was without it. About Kieran in the next room, handling the last unmapped corner of a crisis that had started in a dining room 6 weeks ago, when a woman who should have been welcoming her instead declared her unworthy. She thought about all of it, and she thought, "I am still here." Not as proof of anything, not as a statement, just as a fact, simple and complete. She was still here. From the other room, Kieran's voice went quieter. Then quieter still, then stopped. The silence that followed had a different texture than all the other silences. She set down the cup. He came back into the kitchen. He stood in the doorway, and he looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not in 11 months of dating, not in 6 weeks of marriage, not in any of the preceding 48 hours, which had contained more than most marriages saw in years. "What?" she said. He said Lim talked. She waited. He had documentation, Kieran said. Things he'd gathered over 2 years. Letters, records, some financial documentation. Things that he stopped. His jaw worked for a moment. "Some of it involves my mother. Not the park, something older. Something from before my father died." Amara stood up slowly. "What kind of something?" she said. Kieran looked at her across the kitchen, and his eyes had the specific quality of a man standing at the edge of a thing and looking down into it before he has to decide whether to jump. "The kind," he said quietly, "that changes what I thought I knew about how my father actually died." The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed. Amara stood at the kitchen table in her own apartment and looked at her husband's face and understood that whatever had been settled today, whatever ground had been gained, whatever architecture had been carefully and painfully constructed, had passed before 40 hours, the foundation of it had just shifted in a way that none of them had seen coming. She said his name, just his name. And Kieran Seo, who had walked into rooms that made grown men recalibrate, who had stood in his family's dining room and chosen his wife in front of 20 people, who had spent a night handling things that couldn't be named in a kitchen and come home with his jaw set and his eyes clear, Kieran Seo sat back down at the kitchen table and put his face in his hands. She did not touch him right away. That was the first decision, the instinct she felt and overrode, because Kieran, with his face in his hands, was not a man who needed to be held in this moment. He needed a moment to be inside what he was feeling without someone trying to carry him out of it. She had learned that about him over 11 months of dating and 6 weeks of marriage and 48 hours of the most compressed and demanding intimacy 2 people could move through together, that he processed pain, he processed everything else, which was inward first, and that reaching for him before he came up for air was a form of interruption rather than comfort. So she stood at the kitchen table and she waited. He came up in about 30 seconds. His hands moved from his face to the table, and he pressed them flat there, that gesture, the bracing gesture, the set family gesture she had seen in him and in his mother, and he looked at the table surface for a moment before he looked at her. "Tell me what you know," she said. Quiet, steady. He said, "Lim had documents. Physical ones. He took them from Sora's things. She had them, because my mother gave them to her. Or not gave. Left in a place Sora could access. A storage unit in Jersey City that my mother has kept for 22 years. He paused. Sora found them 4 years ago. She told Lim about them when they were together. What kind of documents? Letters. My father's handwriting. He looked at his hands on the table. He was planning to leave. He'd been he had been building a separate account for 2 years before he died. He was moving money, slowly, the way you do it when you don't want anyone to notice. He stopped. He was planning to take us, me and Sora. He was going to leave my mother. Amara sat down, and he died, she said. He had a cardiac event. At 53, it was documented, investigated, ruled natural. He looked up. But there are letters in that storage unit. Letters between my mother and a man I don't recognize the name of, written in the months before my father died. And there is one letter. He stopped. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were very clear. The clarity of someone on the far side of shock, he said, in the territory where feeling has temporarily been replaced by function. One letter in my mother's handwriting, not addressed to anyone, that reads like a record, private record, of something she did. Amara looked at him steadily. What did it say? I haven't seen it. He said it carefully. Lim described it to me. He's been using it as leverage not against my mother, not yet, not directly, against me. He wanted me to know he had it. He wanted me to understand what would happen if he decided to use it. He was holding it over your family. Yes, and now you know. And now I know. He looked at her. He told me tonight because Park convinced him to. Because Park wants the business relationship preserved, and Lim was a problem. Park needed to resolve to make that happen. So Park made Lim give me the information, and Lim gave it to me because his other option was worse. Where are the documents now? Being collected, he said. I'll have them by morning. She sat with everything he had said. She organized it the way she organized building plans, finding the load-bearing elements, and identifying what was structural and what was decorative and what was actively compromising the integrity of the whole thing. You don't know what that letter says, she said. Not exactly. No. Lim might have described it in the way that served him. He looked at her. Yes, so you don't know yet what your mother did or didn't do. No, I don't know yet, but you have to find out. Yes, he said, I have to find out. The kitchen was very quiet. The cities outside had gone to its late-night register, fewer cars, more distance between sounds, the particular quality of urban silence that is not actually silence, but is the absence of the daytime layers. Are you afraid of what you'll find? She asked. He was quiet for a long time. I'm afraid, he said slowly, of what it will mean if it's what I think it is. Not for me, for he stopped, for what my entire life has been built on understanding. She knew what he meant. She didn't make him explain it. A man who has organized 36 years of himself around a particular narrative of his family, his father's absence, his mother's sacrifice, the reason he became what he became, and who is now standing at the possibility that the foundational story was not what he was told. That is not just a fact to be updated. That is a structural collapse. Whatever those letters say, she said, it happened 22 years ago. Your father is gone. The facts of your life, the choices you made, who you are, those don't change based on what was true then. They change what I understand about her, he said. Yes, they might. And if he couldn't finish it, then we find out, Amara said, and we deal with it. One thing at a time. He looked at her. You can't resolve this tonight, she said. The documents come tomorrow. Tonight you know what you know, which is not yet enough to act on. So come to bed. He stared at her for a moment with the expression of a man who has been handed something so practical it takes a second to land. Come to bed, she said again. You need 4 hours of sleep. And I need you functional tomorrow, when we have to figure out how to have your mother in our home for dinner while you are holding this. You're not just anything, she said. You're choosing to take care of yourself so you can deal with this clearly. That's the only thing you can do right now that's actually useful. He looked at her for one more long moment. Then he pushed back from the table and he stood up and he turned off the kitchen, light Deedon light. They went to bed. She lay beside him in the dark. And she listened to his breathing slow from the tight, controlled rhythm of a man managing something enormous into something closer to sleep, and she did not sleep herself for a long time. She looked at the ceiling and she thought about what it meant to be the person beside someone when the ground under them shifted. Not the person who shifted the ground, not the cause of the crisis, not the solution to it. Just the person who stayed. She had spent 6 weeks trying not to be a burden in this family. She was done with that. Being a burden and being a person were not the same thing, and she had confused them for too long. She closed her eyes. She slept. The documents arrived at 7:40 in the morning, delivered by a man she didn't see. She heard the door, heard Kieran's voice, heard the door close, and she stayed in the bedroom until he came to find her. He was carrying a manila envelope, thick, the kind that has been stored for a long time, and carries the smell of storage in its paper. He sat on the edge of the bed. She sat beside him. He opened it. They read together, or she read beside him. Not all of it, not the parts that were too private for her eyes, but enough. The letters from his father were in a handwriting she could see, had been clear once, and became less clear as the dates progressed. Not illness, just urgency, the handwriting of someone writing faster as time ran out. They described a man who had been afraid of his wife for years before he decided to stop being afraid, who had understood by the end that his fear had been reasonable. The letter in Minhee's handwriting was last. Kieran read it alone. She looked at the window while he read it. She did not look at his face until he set it down. When she looked at his face, she understood. He sat there with the letter on his knee and his hands loose in his lap, and his eyes at a point on the floor that had no feature, and she understood from his expression that what he had been afraid to find was approximately what he had found. Not a clear confession, nothing so clean, but enough. A record of a private decision made by a frightened and powerful woman who had understood that her husband was going to take her children and destroy everything she had built, and who had acted. Not with violence. She thought it important to be precise about this, because the truth mattered more than the drama. With access. With a connection to someone in the medical community described obliquely, in the clipped language of a woman who knew better than to write clearly. With a series of decisions made in the weeks before a 53-year-old man had a cardiac event that was documented, investigated, and ruled natural. Possibly natural, possibly not. 22 years ago. No living witnesses named. No surviving physical evidence beyond this letter, which was not a confession, but was the closest thing to one that a careful woman would allow herself to write. Kieran said nothing for a very long time. She sat beside him and said nothing too. Then he said she was protecting herself. Yes, Amara said. And us. She would have said she was protecting us. Yes, she might have even believed that. She might have. He stood up. He put the letter back in the envelope, and he set the envelope on the dresser, and he stood there with his back to her, and she watched the line of his shoulders, and she waited. What do I do with this? He said. Not to her specifically. To the air. To the specific reality of a man who has just inherited a truth that has no good home. She said, what are your options? He turned around. I could go to the police. The records, the letter, it's not conclusive, but it's 22 years old, and it would destroy your family publicly and potentially expose aspects of your own operations in the process, she said. Straight. And at the end of it, there would likely be no conviction, because there is no surviving physical evidence of anything medical. So that option is call. But you know the cost. I could confront her, he said. Yes. And if she confirms it, then you to decide what kind of relationship you can have with someone who did what she did. Amara looked at him steadily. And if she denies it, you decide whether you believe her. And if I do nothing, you carry it, she said. Every time you look at her. Every dinner. Every phone call. She paused. That has a cost too. He looked at her. What would you do? She thought about it, honestly. I'd confront her, she said. Not for justice. I don't think justice is available here. But because I could not sit across from her at a table and not know whether she knew I knew, I'd need to close that distance. He nodded slowly. Just one nod. The nod of a man who had already arrived at the same answer and needed to hear it said aloud. Not today, he said. Not at the dinner. No, not today. After, when you're ready. He looked at the envelope on the dresser. She's coming to dinner in my home tonight, he said. And I have to look at her, and you don't have to feel anything in particular, Amara said. You just have to get through it. That's all. He looked at her. You've been getting through things your whole life, she said. One dinner. He crossed the room. He sat back down beside her. He put his arm around her and she felt the weight of it, the full, exhausted, real weight of a man leaning, and she held it. One dinner, he said. One dinner. They sat there until the light changed. Minhee arrived at 6. Sora arrived 5 minutes later, which meant they had not come together, which was its own information. Soros looked like someone who had slept badly and made peace with it. No attempt to conceal the shadows under her eyes, her coat buttoned correctly this time, but her face openly tired, in a way she would not have permitted at the dinners in Alpine. She looked at Amara in the doorway and said quietly, "Thank you for including me." "Of course," Amara said, and meant it with the particular meaning of a thing that is not yet comfortable but is chosen anyway. Two aunts arrived together at 6:10 with wine and the slightly over-bright expressions of women who know they are attending a significant occasion and are uncertain of the correct register. Amara had cooked. That was a decision she had made deliberately. Not because she needed to prove something, she was aware enough of herself to know when she was performing and when she was acting from something real, but because cooking in her own kitchen for people in her own home was the specific physical expression of ownership she needed to inhabit tonight. She had made her grandmother's recipe a Ghanaian peanut stew that took 4 hours and filled the apartment with a smell that was warm and complex and entirely hers. Not a performance of culture, just her food in her home. Minhee walked into the apartment and stopped for a moment when the smell hit her. She looked at Amara. "It smells extraordinary," she said. "Thank you," Amara said. "I hope you'll try it." Something shifted in Minhee's expression, small, not dramatic, the specific shift of a woman revising a sentence she had already prepared. "I would like that," she said. They sat at the table. Amara's table, the one she and Kieran had chosen together from a shop in Red Hook on a Saturday in August, before the wedding, before any of this, on a day when the largest problem in their lives was whether the table was too long for the room. It was not too long for the room. It was exactly right. Kieran sat beside her, not at the head beside her. They had talked about this briefly that afternoon. The table would not have a head tonight. It would be a table where people sat. Minhee sat across from Amara, their eyes met across the table, and Amara held the contact and did not look away, and did not perform warmth she didn't feel yet. And Minhee held the contact too, and in her eyes was something that Amara was beginning to recognize as the closest this woman could currently come to honest nakedness in another person's presence. It was a start. Sora sat beside her mother, and for the first 2 courses said almost nothing. Not sullen, just quiet, the quiet of someone who is present and paying attention, and has decided that tonight her job is to listen rather than occupy space. Amara noted it without comment. The 2 aunts carried the conversation for the first hour, in the way that people carry conversations when they are nervous, filling space, asking questions, responding with more enthusiasm than the answers warranted. Amara let them do it. It served a purpose. It created the texture of a normal dinner, which was the scaffolding everything else needed. At some point, one aunt asked about her work, and Amara told them about the community center in the Bronx, the project that had been sitting half finished on her drafting table through all of this. And she talked about it with the direct, specific enthusiasm of someone who is genuinely proud of what they do, without apology, and without the modified version of herself she had been performing at the Alpine dinners. She talked about the angles, about the way she had designed the common spaces to maximize natural light in the winter months. About the materials, honest materials, she said, materials that would age visibly and well, rather than materials that tried to look like something they weren't. The table was quiet when she finished. Minhee said, "What does that mean? Honest materials?" Amara looked at her. She wasn't sure whether the question was genuine or tactical. She decided to treat it as genuine. "It means materials that show what they are," she said. Steel that looks like steel. Wood that shows its grain. Not covering one thing with another thing to make it appear different than what it is. Minhee held her gaze for a moment. "I see," she said. Table absorbed the sentence. Kieran's hand found Amara's under the table. She let him hold it. After dinner, while the aunts were helping clear, a gesture Amara accepted without protest, because it was genuine, and because letting people contribute was its own form of grace. Minhee appeared beside her at the kitchen counter. They stood there for a moment, side by side, in the kitchen that was Amara's kitchen. The dinner, Minhee said, the food. She paused. It was exceptional. My grandmother's recipe, Amara said. You should teach it to me sometime, Minhee said. Amara looked at her. Minhee was looking at the counter. Her hands were at her sides, and her spine was straight, and she was not quite able to look at Amara directly. But the offer was there, in the air between them, awkward and real. Maybe I will, Amara said. It was not forgiveness. She wanted to be clear about that in her own mind, in the record of what she felt. It was not forgiveness, and it was not the erasing of 6 weeks or of a 22-year-old letter sitting in an envelope on a dresser in the next room. It was something smaller than forgiveness and more durable. It was the decision to leave a door open that could have been closed. Minhee left at 9:30. She paused at the door and looked at Amara a full look, the kind she hadn't managed since she arrived, and she said, "Thank you for tonight, Amara." The name. "Good night, Minhee," Amara said. The door closed. Sora was last to leave. She stood in the hallway with her coat on, and she looked at her brother, and Kieran looked at her, and what passed between them was not resolution too much. Still sat between them for resolutions, but something preliminary to it. The acknowledgement that they were still, despite everything, siblings. That the damage had been enormous and was going to take a long time to repair, and that the repairing was going to require things from both of them that were not yet fully understood. "Call you this week," Kieran said. "Okay," Sora said. She looked at Amara. "I meant what I said this morning." "The apology." "I know," Amara said. I have an appointment with a lawyer Thursday." "Good," Amara said. Sora nodded. She left. The apartment was quiet. The specific quiet of a space that has held many people, and is now just two, the lingering warmth of it, the smell of the food still in the air, glasses that needed washing on the counter. Kieran started washing them. Amara picked up a dish towel and stood beside him and dried them as he handed them to her. They did it without talking, the silent, practical choreography of two people who have learned the rhythms of shared space. She dried the wine glasses carefully, holding them up to check for watermarks before setting them down. And she thought about the envelope on the dresser, and she thought about Minhee's hands at her sides in the kitchen, and she thought about her grandmother's recipe, and what it meant that she had made it to night in this home for these people. She thought, this is what it looks like when it works. Not perfect, not resolved. Not the end of difficulty they both knew. There was still the confrontation that Kieran had decided to have with his mother when he was ready. Still the question of what the letter actually meant, and what he would do with knowing it. Still Sora's long roads, back to something functional. Still the parks and whatever managed distance that relationship would require going forward. None of that was over, but none of it had broken them. Kieran handed her the last glass. She set it on the shelf. He pulled the drain stopper, and the water went down, and they both stood there listening to it. And then he turned toward her and leaned against the counter and looked at her with the expression she had come to understand was his most honest one, not. The controlled public face, not the dangerous stillness, not the carefully managed presentation of a man who had learned early that expression was power. Just his face. Just the face of a man who was tired and grateful and still learning imperfectly, and with some damage, how to be inside a life that he had chosen. "Okay," he said, "just that." "Okay," she said back. He reached over and turned off the kitchen light. They stood for a moment in the dark, the ambient light of the city, coming through the windows, orange and blue, and the specific light of a place that never goes fully dark, that operates on the permanent understanding that someone is always awake somewhere, that the business of living does not schedule itself around anyone's need for stillness. She had always loved that about cities, the refusal to be quiet when you needed them to be quiet, the insistence on continuing regardless. "The letter," she said. Into the dark. "I know," he said. "Not tonight," she said. "But you're going to have to decide." "I know. And whatever you decide." "Amara, I'm saying it anyway," she said. "Whatever you decide about your mother, about what to do with what you know. I'm not going to tell you what the right answer is. But I need you to know that there's no version of it where I'm not beside you. He was quiet. Even if the answer is nothing, she said. Even if you decide you can't prove it, and you can't do anything, and you choose to carry it, I'm beside you for that too. He moved in the dark. She felt him cross the small distance, and his arms came around her, and she put her face against his shoulder, and she held on, not desperately, not with the grip of fear, but the solid, deliberate hold of a person who has decided that this is where she stands. They stood like that for a while. Then she said, against his shoulder, that cut above your eyebrow. He made a sound. Chicago, he said. A door. A door. Yes, you walked into a door. Something like that. She pulled back far enough to look at his face in the city light. Cut was healing already more scar than wound, the skin knitting itself back together in the way that skin does, without ceremony, simply because that is what skin does when it is given time. I'm going to need more than that eventually, she said. Yeah, he said, I know. Not tonight, she said. Not tonight, he agreed. She stepped back. She found his hand in the dark. She held it and she walked toward the hallway, and he followed her, and they went to bed in the apartment that was theirs, that had held a morning full of revelations, and an afternoon of confrontation, and an evening of imperfect, costly, necessary zid, and the city went on outside the window, being the city, indifferent and continuous, and full of other people's stories running parallel to theirs in the dark. 3 weeks later, Kieran sat across from his mother in a restaurant in Midtown. Not the house. Neutral ground his choice, and she had accepted it without question, which told him that she understood this was not a routine visit. Amara was not there. That had been her decision. This is between you and her, she had said. I'll be at the office. Call me after. She had said it simply, and he had looked at her for a moment and then nodded, because she was right, and because she always seemed to know when something needed to be hers and when it needed to be left to him. He put the envelope on the table between them. Minhee looked at it. Her face did not change, which was itself a change of a kind, the face of a woman who has been carrying something for 22 years and has understood, at some level beneath consciousness, that this moment was always going to arrive. She did not ask what it was. She said, How long have you known? 3 weeks, he said. She nodded. She looked at the envelope. She did not reach for it. I need to ask you one question, he said. She looked at him. Did you do it, he said, yes or no? The restaurant went on around them. A waiter passed. Somewhere across the room, someone laughed at something. The ordinary indifferent business of the world. Minhee looked at her son for a very long time. Then she said, He was going to take you. That's not what I asked. I know, she said, but that is the answer. The silence that followed was the longest of his life. He sat in it and he felt every year of it. Every year of being raised by a woman he had believed was pure sacrifice, pure strength, engine of everything his family had survived. And he felt the distance between that understanding and this one. And it was not a comfortable distance to feel. It was the distance of a man losing something that cannot be recovered once it has been seen clearly. I'm not going to the police, he said. She did not exhale. She had been holding too much for too long to exhale in a restaurant. I'm not doing it because there's nothing provable, he said. And because it would cost too much to the wrong people. And because, he stopped, because despite everything you are, my mother and I am not capable of the alternative. But I need you to understand something. She waited. I know, he said. I will always know. And you will always know that I know. And what that means for what we are to each other, I don't know yet. I'm not going to decide that tonight. But what I have decided is this. He leaned forward slightly. My wife is the center of this family's future, not a guest in it, not a problem to be managed. The center. And if you want to be part of that future part of my life, part of any relationship with me, that is the foundation of it. Her name, her chair at the table, her presence in every room she chooses to occupy. That is non-negotiable. And I need to know you understand that not as a rule I'm setting, but as the truth of what my life is. Minhee looked at him. Her eyes were dry, they always were. But in them, in the particular quality of her gaze, was something he had not seen before in 61 years of knowing her face. Not guilt, she would not perform guilt. Not shame, which was guilt's lesser cousin. Something older, and more structural. The look of a woman encountering the full consequence of choices made in a different life, and understanding that consequence is not punishment. It is just what is real. I understand, she said. He picked up the envelope. He did not give it to her, and he did not take it back. He held it for a moment, and then he put it in his jacket pocket. I'll call you Sunday, he said. Okay, she said. He left the restaurant. Outside, the November air hit him, and he stood on the clock for a moment with people moving around him, and the city being what it was, enormous and indifferent, and full of the ongoing rush of other people's everything. And he took one full breath. Then he took out his phone. He called Amara. She answered on the second ring. He could hear the background sound of her office voices at a distance, the specific acoustic quality of a large open space. Hey, she said. Hey, he said. A pause. How are you, she asked. He thought about the question honestly, which she always made him do, because she always meant it literally. Okay, he said. Not good. Okay. That's honest, she said. Yeah. Come by the office, she said. I'm leaving in an hour. We can walk. It's 30 degrees, he said. So walk fast, she said. He almost smiled. Not quite. Almost. I'll be there in 40 minutes, he said. He put his phone in his pocket. He started walking. The city was the city permanent, grinding, spectacular in its indifference. He walked through it with his hands in his pockets, and the envelope in his jacket, and the cold air doing what cold air does, which is to clarify everything it touches, to strip away the ambient warmth and leave only what is actually there. Thought about his father's handwriting, about the letters that had described a man trying to get free. He thought about his mother's face in the restaurant set, about what it cost a person to say I know and then live the rest of their life inside that sentence. He thought about Amara at her drafting table, drawing honest lines, and he thought about the specific thing she had said in the dark kitchen 3 weeks ago, which was, "There's no version of this where I'm not beside you." He had been beside people all his life. He had been beside his mother, beside his sister, beside the men who worked with him and the operations they ran and the weight they all carried with the particular dignity of people who have no choice but to carry it. He had not known, until Amara, what it felt like to have someone beside him, not managing him, not needing from him, not afraid of what he was, just beside. He walked faster. The cold was real and immediate, and he let it be real and immediate because the present was the thing he had, not the letters, not the 22 years, not the grief of understanding that the story of his childhood was more complicated than he had believed. The present was the thing. He arrived at her building 14 minutes early. He stood on the sidewalk and he looked up at the building, clean, modern, honest materials, steel and glass that showed what they were, and he put his hands in his pockets and he waited. She came through the glass doors 6 minutes later, in her coat, her bag over one shoulder, her face doing the specific thing it did when she spotted him in a crowd, not a performance, just a shift. The involuntary small change that crossed her face when she found him wherever he was. She walked to him. "You're early," she said. "Yeah," he said. She looked at his face. "Okay," she said, reading it. "Okay," he confirmed. She took his hand. They started walking into the cold, into the city, into the ordinary, extraordinary, ongoing business of two people who had chosen each other. Through everything, choosing someone through everything actually costs. And were walking now in the direction of home, which was the apartment on the street they lived on, with the table from Red Hook and the kitchen where she had made her grandmother's recipe, and the window where he had stood too many mornings, with coffee looking out at a city that did not look back. Home, her hand in his, cold from the air and warming in his grip. Behind them, the city went on being the city. Ahead of them was everything that was still unfinished, and everything that had been made, imperfectly and at great cost, into something that would hold. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. They walked.